Hey, Shanice.
Hey, Portia.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
Dr. Sam.
Hey, how are you?
Andrea. Hey.
Hello.
Oh my gosh. I feel like this has been such a long time coming.
We
It
made
has.
it.
Yes.
Coley, are we live? We live. Oh my gosh. Thank you to everybody that's tuning in. This is going to be a fantastic conversation. So Shanice and I are both representing Rebuild the Hood. And Shanice, I'll let you give your little spiel about what Rebuild the Hood does as an organization to kick us off.
Sure. So, as Portia stated, my name is Shanice Alford, and I am the president and founder of Rebuild the Hood Incorporated. We're a 501c3 not for profit organization that is dedicated to revitalizing distressed communities via investment in small businesses and real estate. So, the conversation that we're having here tonight is incredibly important simply because family is a foundational pillar of our organization. So, we have four others, which is mindset, wealth, real estate, and business. And we have added family because we realize that we cannot rebuild our communities without rebuilding the individuals and families within them. So this particular conversation is incredibly important. And we're so excited to have Dr. Sam and Sandria here with us tonight. And so that's my spiel.
I love it. And I couldn't have said it better myself. So why don't you guys, Dr. Sam and Sandra, introduce yourselves individually and then also tell us about the Black Adoption Podcast. We'll start there.
All right. Well, I'm Dr. Sam. I am one half of Black to the Beginning, as well as the Black Adoption Podcast. I am joined here by my lovely sister friends and partner.
Oh, wait. Is this where I come in?
That's where you come in.
Okay. And I am Sandria Washington. I am a writer. I am a wellnesspreneur. I work full-time in community engagement and development. So I love what Rebuild the Hood is doing. We definitely need to connect offline.
Will.
Our organization definitely does some similar work. I see some synergy. And I'm super happy to be here.
Awesome. I love that. Okay, so as Shanice mentioned, one of our newer pillars is family. And it's really important to us, like as we're rebuilding the hood, to start rebuilding that family structure because that's our first introduction to everything. That's how we learn how to love. That's how we learn how to communicate. Like that's the foundation for who we begin to become as people. And so my question to you guys, coming from the backgrounds with the adoption, like how has that impacted you even in your adulthood? And how you showcase love for other people? Because I know, Sandria, you just mentioned that like you work in a similar spaces that we do. So like, what is it like to have that kind of potential disconnect, but still have such a heart for the people and want to give and pour back?
It's a deep question.
Sorry, we covered it.
I know. Look, coming in hot. I like hot. So I will preface everything by saying that both myself and Dr. Sam are what's considered late discovery adoptees. So we found out about our adoptions later in life. So for me, I found out 5 years ago. I was 38 at the time. And so when you talk about, how does being adopted impact your relationships, I'm just now looking at it in hindsight. So I'm looking at, just different perspectives on, I was going to say love, but it's even beyond love and relationships. Just even something, I was having a conversation with a colleague yesterday, and we were talking about the concept of home. And we were talking about home ownership, but also displacement. Like, what does it mean to be displaced, especially as Black people? And I was sharing with her that for me, home ownership is something that's really important, but it's something that I've had, I guess, a fear about because my fear is not having not owning a home outright. So like, I don't want to pay a mortgage. Like, I want to be done, because I know what it feels like to be displaced from a home, from a physical home. But even when you add that layer of adoption and being separated from the first home that you've ever known, that even plays into, you know, that anxiety of like, yeah, like I want something that I know can't be taken away from me, you know, whether that is a person or whether that is the bank coming back to say, no, this is our house now. So even just in things like that, I'm finding threads of where being separated from biological family has played out in my life.
And then for you, Dr. Sam.
I would say it's a little bit different for me. I think that from a personal perspective, when it has come to relationships, I feel like I have been fortunate to love and be loved, right? Whether that has been like through marriage, through friends, or, you know, what have you. I've been fortunate, like in that regard. And I haven't really looked back on it and been like, well, has adoption played any role in that per se? So I think part of me watching my adoptive parents, right? So my parents, and seeing, you know, a certain type of household, seeing love, receiving love, that sort of thing. Like I haven't ever felt unattached, if you will. I will say though that I think that part of what has impacted me is probably more so professionally, but maybe trying to fulfill a personal need. So I think for me, because I spent about 15 years as a clinician, I've always been in fix mode, or what I would consider to be like perfectionist mode. So whatever feels off or awry, I need to fix, I need to problem solve. This is what I need to do. It's like a compulsion almost, where it's like, what's going on? If there's a problem, I need to solve it. I think a lot of times that comes across, especially maybe like to friends, as like loyalty or always showing up, or, you know, I'm the person that you can come to or what have you. But I think ultimately it has been a detriment to me, because I've somehow felt that I can't come in and share all the things that are going on with me. So I like to say, like, from a personality perspective, I'm definitely private, but at the same time, I've always looked at it like I don't want to burden anybody with, you know, issues that are going on with me. So I tend to lay low and fix without necessarily fixing everything that's going on with me. And that's a problem.
Ooh, listen, you just said a mouthful. That is so true. And I think that's very true for a lot of people, and they don't even realize it. So for you to have that awareness is half the battle, I would say. What I love about the four of us here is that we have these different dynamics. Like, even you guys both being adopted have your various perspectives on it and how you approach it. And then correct me if I'm wrong, Shanice, you come from a traditional family. Your parents are still married.
Yes, so my parents have been married for 47 years. So yes, I come from the traditional nuclear family that you would call it. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you feel like that impacts kind of like your give back perspective? Because you guys don't know yet, but Shanice has this fantabulous plan for how to take over and change the world.
Okay. All right. Let us know. Okay.
So, Shanice, do you feel like having that traditional nuclear family impacts any of that?
Well, absolutely. The way that I was raised, definitely had incredibly humble beginnings, lower middle class family. But what I was taught in my family is that it's bigger than me, meaning that this world is waiting for you to show up and to also give back. My family is incredibly kind-hearted, free-hearted, will give you the shirt off of our backs. So that has definitely impacted me to become the woman that I am, because now I have this organization where I really want to transform the world for Black people across across the country, the world, globally. So it has definitely affected me, because that's how I grew up. That's how they raised me, and that's how they were raised. So it was definitely, brought down.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I have divorced parents and step parents, and I always say that I have the best step parents in the world. And I feel like I may potentially end up being a step parent, and I think that that has definitely given me a heart for like other people. Sometimes the things that we lack growing up, we end up wanting to pour and give out to other people. And I know for me, I'm always like, I try to show love and kindness to everybody that I, encounter, um, just because of the upbringing that I had. And I'm blessed to have so many bonus parents. Like, I feel like some people only get two, and I'm blessed to have four. And it wasn't always easy to navigate something like that. I feel like everything ends up working out together for our good. But as you guys know, the title of this conversation was Unconventional Families. And I feel like sometimes the definition of that can be varying depending on the person and their experiences, because you can come from a traditional two-parent household and still have an unconventional upbringing if there's strife in the household or an abusive parent or what have you. And so I would like for you guys to define what you feel like a conventional family would be like.
I wouldn't call families conventional. I think that's a way of labeling, and I think also putting an expectation on what they should look like. In fact, I would
Mhm.
probably say that all families have some version of being
I
unconventional.
agree.
So I think it's, especially for Black families, I think we can do ourselves a favor by releasing some of those, standards and expectations of what it should look like. Because even if I'm thinking about myself, um, coming out of college and saying like, okay, you should be married by this particular point, you should have children by this particular point, and doing a lot of, like make sure you check, those boxes or what have you. And it's like, that's not always necessarily the right way to go either. So I think whatever feels good for you, even if that means having to, end up in divorce, which I'm currently in that process as well, then for me, it is the best thing at this point in time for me personally. But I look forward to my children having bonus parents and all that, because I've done the conventional, right? Quote unquote conventional. It did what it needed to do. And now it's going on to something else. And I think that's going to be fine for me as well.
Oh my gosh, that's so good and that's so true. And I can tell by Shanice's and Sandria's nods that they're in agreement. I
Yeah.
do feel like there's just like this looming standard of what a family should be, especially for us 80s, 90s babies. I know I grew up watching The Cosby Show and just thinking that was the epitome of what a family should be, and that I was going to have, the husband and five kids, and we were going to perform, Ray Charles for the Grammy.
Right.
I
Right.
really believed that was going to be my life, and you couldn't tell me otherwise. But because I grew up with the divorced parents and everything, that was the focus for me for a long time. I actually didn't want to get married. I just wanted the five kids, believe it or not. But that goes back to what you said, Dr. Sam, about us all having our own idea of what like our personal conventional, family is. And I too am divorced. Praise the Lord. Um,
Hallelujah.
Look, this gonna turn into a different type of family conversation.
because I'm just saying, Sandra, you do have to make the best decision for yourself and your children if
Yeah.
you have them, because there is no conventional. And then especially for us as Black people, and I would love for you guys to chime in on this, like it feels like there's this looming unspoken trauma that may or may not go back to days of slavery and us being separated and like wanting to kind of like get back to, something that our ancestors, were fighting so hard for and, unfortunately had to endure. But it just feels like there's, or at least the media makes it seem like we have less nuclear families. And obviously Shanice is not an example of that. She's can battle that for us. But it does seem like us as Black people are marketed in the media to seem like we never have our, we don't have the nuclear family. And I just know that's not true. So like, where do you guys think that stereotype comes from? And do you guys think that that's true?
So I'll say I don't think that's true. But just to back up on the unconventional piece, right? So when I saw the flyer, because I think the flyer was the first time that I saw like what the actual title for tonight would be, and I was like, unconventional family. I'm like, well, it is conventional, like because I think, yes, there's this, leading narrative about, nuclear family. Two parents means a, female mother, male father, two kids, picket fence, all of that. But I think when you talk about conventional families and you talk about Black families, like in our families, we know what it looks like to have your grandmother raise you and your cousins, or an aunt raise somebody. Like for us, that's not necessarily unconventional, because I assure you, if you go out into the middle of the street right now and you just poll random people like, hey, did you grow up with a cousin, or do you know a cousin who grew up with another relative? Like most of us know that experience. That's not necessarily unconventional in that sense. So I think just kind of expanding that definition, like, well, who says for our families, for Black families, that conventional has to look like this particular thing that mainstream society says this is a conventional family. So yes, you can have a Cosby Show family. Like I grew up watching Cosby. I didn't think that was far-fetched, because there are families that look very similar to that. But then there are families like, we always like to use the example of Walona on Good Times. She's a fly single woman and she adopted Penny. Like that is now a family. So I think, we get to define like, okay, well, what does that look like? And now that's conventional for us.
I love that. And I think it's so important to spread that narrative, because I know for me personally, family has always been kind of like a sore spot. And we've talked about this in our Rebuild the Hood meetings on why it's so imperative to change the narrative on what conventional is. Because, like you said, for us historically, like it's not always, Cosby, like you do get that, but it's not always that. I know I grew up seeing my grandparents more than I saw my parents and cousins, just as much as I saw siblings as well. And what we aim to do is to get people to not feel alienated by their experiences, because regardless of who was around you and your upbringing, you still can go on to do great things. Like where you start doesn't have to be where you finish, and it doesn't have to necessarily have a negative connotation to it either. Like what I love with what you guys are doing, you guys are unapologetically sharing your stories. Like literally the podcast is the Black Adoption Podcast. Like it doesn't get any more straightforward. More straightforward with that. But I remember, Sandria, when you first started posting about it on Facebook, I was like, this is so cool. I love how this is just like bold and in your face, because I feel like we need more of that. I think in this era of social media, it's become who can put on the best show, who can make it seem like they have the, the happiest family, or, like the perfect pregnancy and this, that, and the other. And truth be told, we're all fighting the same battles and all have something that we have to deal with, regardless of who you share your household with. So my next question for you guys is, what are you looking to accomplish with the podcast? Like, are you guys looking to kind of bring together more adoptees, or like kind of like change the stigma? What's the goal there?
All the above.
All of the above.
Okay, nail me head. Keep going.
I think what I appreciate about what it is that we've been doing is that we've been getting the perspectives of so many people, because there have been so many people that have been tied to our particular stories. So when there are people on the outside, or quote unquote outside of adoption, it's like, oh, well, that just includes the adoptee, the birth parents, the adoptive parents, and like that's the end of it, right? But our experiences have definitely included, like, what about the biological siblings? What about this extended biological family? What about spouses? What about children? And I think that, what it is that we want to see happen is to really bring out all of those stories, because I think that allows for people to feel more connected to adoption, because I think because of the stigma and shame that has been around it for so long, people want to back up from it. Like, that has nothing to do, with me. But it's like, well, if you married somebody who's adopted, it's going to impact you. If you have children, it's going to, it's one of those things. Adoption is going to impact everyone for generations, not just the adoptee. And so I think that we've been getting so many stories and seek to bring in more stories and even conversations that are intersecting, adoption as well. So thinking about infertility and, Black maternal health and things of that nature, where it's like we need to be having conversations around a multitude of different things that also align with adoption, so that we can all get into the conversation as it relates to the Black family.
I love that. It's so much bigger than just, picking up someone else's child, so to speak.
So much bigger.
Like, I didn't even think about all of the, and I'm sure it's much more than what you just said, but like, that's so true. Like, how it has such like a domino effect in so many different areas. Like, that's crazy deep. So like, what do you guys feel like would be, I guess, the biggest misconception that's affiliated with adoption? Because I feel like for a long time, it was kind of just like, the teen parent that got pregnant unexpectedly. And so, then they put the baby, or, even worse, the fire station story. Like, I feel like there's so many like stereotypes, but what do you guys feel like is the biggest misconception? And what would you like for us as a people to begin doing to combat that?
So I'll say, and I mean, we can probably rattle off a few, but I think a main one, adoptees don't look like me and Samantha. When people think about adoption and they think about Black adoption, they think of babies. They do not think of adults.
So true.
At all. And so just that in itself is a myth. Those babies are eventually, God willing, going to grow up, and you don't stop being adopted. Like, it's a thing that has happened, and like that it is, you are adopted. And so I think just getting people to even think beyond adoption equals babies. There are adult adoptees, but I think a distinction is that, you don't get to hear from us, not until recently, right? So previously, anything about adoption was usually from the perspective of adoptive parents. And then within that, it was white adoptive parents. So you weren't hearing the voices of Black people in this space at all. And so I think that's a huge myth. You touched on one about, birth mothers usually being these teens, distraught. That's not always the case either. Grown women also place their babies for adoption. Of course, just at a baseline level, Black people don't adopt. And that's just not true. Like, that is completely false. Whether we do it formally or informally, that is something that we do. That's something that we've been doing. And so I think for us, it's just important to like just take that out of our vocabulary. Like, I try to be very conscious not to even repeat that phrase. Black people don't adopt. Black people, like, stop it. We do. We've been doing it. Now, do we talk about it a lot? Are we very vocal and public about it? Maybe not as much, but at a baseline, we definitely adopt, and we adopt formally through private adoption, through agencies. So it's not always kinship, because people will fall back on that. Like, oh, but we don't go the agency route. That is not true either. Both myself and Samantha are both private adoptions.
Dr. Sam, you want to chime in?
I mean, Sandria dropped the mic on it. I think I'm going to
Indeed.
I'm going to let that go. Yes.
Indeed.
I echo.
Indeed. Yeah, there's so many. So like what can we begin to do? Obviously you guys have the podcast, but like as some as women who have went through these experiences, and like you said, Sandria, for once an adoptee, forever an adoptee, what can we begin to do to change the narrative surrounding this? I had the pleasure of doing some marketing for the Cradle. I don't know if
Mm.
you guys are familiar.
They were our first podcast episode.
They were.
Yes.
Really? Oh, check
Yes.
that out. And it
Yes.
was, I just remember going through some of the photos, and like you said, it was like, okay, let's put some of these Black families out here. Let's try, trying to
Mhm.
change the narrative a little bit. But like, what can we begin to do? How can we, as non-adoptees, support adoptees and help change the narrative surrounding that?
Mhm. Well, I think the first thing, for me at least, is to recognize that adoption is not this bad thing all the time, right? Like the changing the mental model that it's a negative thing. And when I say it's a negative thing, the word itself. So there are a lot of experiences that people have had that could be challenging, right? But when we come right out the gate as saying like, oh, you're adopted or what have you, that immediately minimizes the individual that has been adopted. It even minimizes like their family and anyone that's associated with them, like, oh, you all had to, build your family in this way, so it immediately puts this shame around it. So I think just getting away from the notion that the word itself is bad. We're not talking about the experiences behind it, because that's a whole other,
No, people do
issue.
treat adoption like a curse word. They do.
They
Yeah.
treat it like a curse word, seriously. So I think that's the first thing. I think also too, one thing that Sandra and I have talked about often is that Black families have to accept the fact that this exists in their families, that they're not separated from it in some way, that they aren't perpetuating the myth of like Black people don't adopt, because when they continue to perpetuate that sort of myth, then again it like brings in that silence issue again. So now if I'm adopted, I don't even feel comfortable talking to anybody about the fact that I'm adopted. As late discovery adoptees, I mean, all of our existence was shrouded in secrecy, right? And you have to step back sometimes, like, you all didn't talk about this either. Like, it's one thing to not talk about it to us, but at least what I can see within my family, it wasn't even talked about amongst them. So therefore, my mother's not talking to her sister or whomever. So therefore, you don't even know how to support me. We're just going to bring this child into the home. You don't have anyone to talk to. And so even with my mother and her fertility concerns, right? Never talked about it with anybody. So as Black people, we can't be around here not having conversations, at least with one other person. You don't have to tell everybody, but at least with one other individual that you feel safe and secure with, that you can share, and that you can get some healing for yourself, get some perspective. So that way you can be that light for somebody else, right? Or you can be that supporter. You can be a better parent, a better sister, whatever it is that you are within that particular relationship.
That's so true. I do feel like historically we as Black people tend to sweep things under the rug because there's this stereotype of, us looking a certain way. And so we want to like put on our best for company and, just keep it, keep it quiet. And that's what, that could be with adoption. That could be, like you said, with the fertility issue.
Everything.
With, unfortunate encounters with other family members that could take place in the family. Like, it's this, perpetual state of trying to portray perfection when it's not necessary. And one of the things we're going to be introducing in the near future is living room conversations. Just being able to come into a place of comfort. Remember rent parties and things?
Yeah.
Hang out. Like, instead of trying to raise the rent, we're trying to raise awareness of the, just the issues that are silently plaguing our people, because when you don't talk about something and you try to keep it a secret, it can't really be resolved. And so then it ends up secretly spreading like wildfire, and like it becomes the elephant in the room and nobody wants to address it. And so like when we bring these things up, then the shame becomes less of an issue, because it's like, oh wait, you have that issue too, or like, I didn't realize, that was so similar to what I've experienced. So I love that you guys have kind of joined forces and are already kind of doing that. But we do look forward to kind of creating a home base for people to be able to have some of these necessary conversations, because honestly, that's where it all starts. Like, we don't know what's needed for change until we all kind of come together. And so that's what we're looking to do in our rebuild process. One, just getting, conversation started for sure. Shanice, did you want to chime in on anything that we talked about as it relates to the organization, or yourself, of course?
So yes, I wanted to piggyback off of the living room conversations that we're going to be having. I think that it's very important to continue to have these conversations because it brings awareness, and then as well it brings healing. And one of the things that I saw in you guys' Instagram bio was heal #Black family. And when I say that really resonated with me, especially with us introducing the family pillar, knowing how important it is to bring everyone together, to not be silent, to not be shameful about who we are, the identity, right? That's a whole thing that we need to really build our roots in. So I think that it's important to have these conversations, to continue to have them, because we need to speak. We need to speak about who we are, what we have experienced, because it's going to only help further generations. We do not want to continue the cycle of pain and shame and guilt. We want to bring healing for our future generations, because if we don't, what will our communities continue to look like, right? So I think it is very important, and I just want to thank you guys once again just for all the gems. Like it's just having these conversations are so important. Something else that we're going to be implementing, in addition to our living room series, is a State of the Black Family address, where we're going to be talking about issues that are consistently going on in our communities on a consistent basis. And then we are also going to be beginning a study about the Black family, because we see these different stats, and sometimes I'm like,
who did that study?
I don't know. So let's conduct an independent study. So we're on the ground floor of doing that as well. So I just love what you all are doing, and we'll definitely be working together in the future, because what you all are doing is incredibly important. Continue to have the conversations, continue to let people know about this, because it's just incredibly important. So,
and it's bigger than adoption. I literally went to a workshop this past Saturday. Northwestern Memorial did a workshop about how family secrets are killing us. And so specifically looking at Black families and just talking about health history, because we don't talk about it. Grandmama passed and nobody talks about she had cancer. Nobody talks about, grandmother and aunts having fibroids and having hysterectomies. And now if you are a young woman trying to start a family and you're having issues, you have no idea that the women who came before you had the same issues, because nobody talks about it. We just had a podcast guest share that same exact story. And so it's like these family secrets, whether it's adoption, substance abuse, molestation, health history, like that kills us. And so, just having these conversations, and it's all connected.
Man, that's so good. And it's so true, because I've had both of those conversations. I remember when I found out I had a fibroid, and it wasn't a big deal, but it was also a big deal. I went immediately to my mother and my grandmother and found out my grandmother had a hysterectomy, and nobody had ever said it. Like, she had 2 healthy babies and she was done having kids. So like, it didn't matter. So they just never said anything. And I'm like, when my cramps once a month were worse than everybody else's, y'all didn't think this was a fine time to let me know that this was something that was going on? But it's just really interesting how, and I don't think we intentionally, gatekeep information, but it's just this this energy of like having to keep things private. You know, what
Yeah.
happens in this house stays in this house. And I don't know how that has become our culture, but I think we need to kind of rewire that, because as much
Mhm.
as I love us, you know, I love our rhythm, but this is definitely part of our blues when it
Yeah.
comes to just like secrets and, you know, leaving, you know, things private to our families. Because like I said, once again, once we all come together, we realize we all are having the same conversations anyway. um, but I'm really proud of our generation, because we have, I feel like, really kind of opened the door for change and
Mhm.
invited just opportunity to share and be transparent. Because when you isolate somebody, it really does kind of distort their thinking, and it's really unfair.
Yeah.
Like, I was just telling somebody the other day, like, when you lie to someone, like, you don't know how that can impact their long term. Like, you're literally distorting their way of thinking and making them think that they're crazy. Their intuition could be telling them one thing, but you're saying something
You
else.
are gaslighting them. Like,
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
feel like I was gaslit for 38 years because I thought
Mhm.
it was me. I thought it was something within me that was off or just different. And then come to find out, it's like, no, this thing has happened. Those feelings in your gut and your intuition, like that was real, but you learn to distrust what your gut and your emotions are telling you because the people who love you and
Yeah,
who've
and
raised you have lied.
after that.
Yeah,
That, like, that could have impacted you, you know, with a relationship or with friends, because you don't trust your instinct anymore, because you feel
right.
like this must not be wrong. Dr. Sam said in the beginning of the conversation, like, this really does trail off into so many different arenas. But yeah, these conversations are so necessary to have, because I'm enlightened just from this 40 minutes or so we've been sitting here talking, and I'm excited to continue to have these chats, like with our living rooms and everything that we have coming up. So is there anything that you guys have coming that we can be excited about?
Well, we are knee
Hmm.
deep into season 4 of
Rock
the
roll.
Black Adoption Podcast. We are approaching our 50th episode, so we are super
Here we
excited about
are.
that.
That's
Um,
okay, dope. We got to get a cake.
yeah, yeah, yes,
I know
yes,
you
that
said on
deserves a
your
cake,
Christmas game, Sandria,
right?
but we
Look,
got
I'm gonna have a little sliver because this deserves a cake. I mean, having a podcast is a lot of work. I know, we talked about how everybody and their mama has a podcast, but everybody and their mama doesn't sustain a podcast.
bars.
You might have 5 episodes and then ghost.
That's it.
So we have 4 seasons, approaching 50 episodes, and
Mhm.
many more stories to tell. So we're just gonna keep going. Looking at other avenues of how to share this work. Really excited about creating some curriculum. We like to look at Black adoption in pop culture because pop culture influences everybody, and we're all watching adoption stories and not even recognizing that they're Black adoption stories. And so we're excited about just bringing that to the forefront. I was watching
I'm hoping
Creed
that
last
you guys
night.
can get some yeah, I was gonna say, I hope
And
you
I'm
guys
like,
can get
Creed is
some
a whole
celebrity.
Black adoption story. Stop playing within the first 5 minutes. So we
And I
just,
love that series. Like, I love that series
yeah.
movie. It's one of my favorites. Not just because Michael B. Jordan be with his shirt off. I
I
mean, it doesn't hurt,
mean, it doesn't
but
hurt. He's doing a lot for Black adoption and doesn't even
girl,
know
he can do a
it.
lot for me. Okay,
So we
I'm
just
just
want to
kidding.
bring more of that to the forefront because, you asked the question, how can we engage people who aren't intimately connected? And it's like pop culture, we're all intimately connected to that. We're all in social media and movies and music and so that's where we're trying to direct people's focus to so we can expand the conversation.
Yes, because at the end of the day, you know, for us, the family pillar all boils down to all of us being connected and being family in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Because it used to be where Black people looked out for each other, like your neighbors could stop you on the street if
Oh
they thought
yeah.
something you weren't
Oh
supposed to
yeah.
do. And we've kind of gotten away from that. And so, like, as we're kind of getting back to building out the community, we're understanding that, like, family has more than one look. people have more than one expectation. Like we have to be more open and transparent about what that looks like. And I love your pop culture reference because one of my favorite shows and my actual celebrity crush is Will Smith. So
Yes.
90s
Yes.
on Fresh Prince, listen.
Yes, Fresh Prince. Yes.
Yeah, but I feel like that's another great example
It
of,
is.
even though he wasn't formally adopted by his aunt and his uncle, they took him in and raised them as
Yeah.
his own son. And
Yeah.
so he had his issues with his dad, and we were able to see those
To
things
see
on
that.
the
Yep.
screen.
Mhm.
But I don't recall really seeing things like that before. So yeah, that's such a great example. But yeah, we will definitely be tuning in for the next episodes.
Yes.
If you
Yes.
guys haven't, I think it's a great idea to binge listen to the Black Adoption Podcast while you're working, cleaning, whatever.
Yes. It's good for walking, commuting, all the things.
Yes,
Yes.
because it's walking season. It's finally getting a little sunshine here in
Yes.
Chicago.
Yes.
So yes, absolutely. So a question to all three of you. What do you want to leave our audience with before we hop off?
Hmm.
It was the collective for me.
Right.
I know.
Okay,
I-
I'll start.
Okay.
What do you think? I want to leave our audience with the notion that you don't have to submit to what your expectations are. Yes, go for your dreams, absolutely, but be open to, what God has for you, and, don't feel like you have to carry any shame associated with what has happened in your family or who you believe to be. Nothing is off the table, like you don't have to carry that shame with you. We can be open, we can be transparent, and that transparency will often lead to an open door to your dream. Sometimes you'd be surprised.
Mhm. So I'll say to piggyback off of that transparency, I would like to leave everyone with your story, your voice matters. So the very thing that you might be afraid to talk about, you might be
Mhm.
afraid of the backlash, or you might think people won't get it. Share your story. It is
Mhm.
going to be a testimony, not only for you, but for somebody else. You don't know how many lives you might impact.
Right.
Samantha and I were nervous about creating Black to the Beginning and a podcast. We didn't think anybody would listen because nobody talks about adoption. It's going to be crickets. And that has not been the case. So many people have reached out and are impacted. So share your story, push past any fear, any insecurity, and just know that somebody needs to hear your story in the way that you tell it, and only you can tell it.
Yes, here for it.
I would like to leave the audience with just remember how dope, how strong, how powerful Black families are. That despite everything that we have encountered throughout history, we are still here, we are still persevering. Our families look a lot of different ways, and no one can tell us precisely how they should look. And I think it's also important to note, too, that despite what it is that you may have gone through individually, collectively, to not stay in that space of woe is me, right? But to lean back into your community, lean back into that one other person where you can begin to move past trauma. It's like we're not going to sit in these sad stories about our families and what mainstream media would like for us to think about our families. We move, we're going to get things done, we're going to leave legacy, we are love, all of those things, period, point blank.
Love it.
Period.
More bars.
Yes.
Yeah, man.
So I want to leave the audience with there is so much power that we don't even know that we possess. There is power in vulnerability. There is power in conversations. There is power in community. And most of all, there is power in unity. So we have to really think about how we're going to move forward and know that it really just takes one step. It just takes one step to make a change. It just takes one step to make an impact. That is our vision statement, to invest, impact, empower. And we can do that just by having a conversation, by being vulnerable, by being open to having a community, and then by uniting. So that's what I want to leave the.
Yes.
All right.
I love it all. I absolutely love
Yes.
it all. Thank you guys for joining tonight.
Thank you.
This may or may not be the last time you see all of us again.
We hope not. We
Right.
hope not.
Yes, absolutely. So you guys drop the comments. We want to know what you guys thought. We want to hear from you as well. But we will definitely be back with another live chat. Thank you again, Black to the Beginning.
Yes.
Dr.
Thank you.
Sandria. Again, they can find the podcast, Spotify.
Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Amazon, Stitcher, all the places.
All the places.
Okay. Anywhere.
Yes.
Pretty much.
I love it. And you guys can visit and learn more about Rebuild the Hood at rebuildthehood.org. And you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at those handles as well. But yes, everybody have a good evening. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, ladies. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Thank you.